Okay, so everybody, normally on these calls too, we'll talk about like the upcoming like day of action theme, what it's going to be. And so, this month that is going to be Rose's Law, Animal Bill of Rights. And so we'd really love to see, frankly, Matthew gives us the updates every month of how many actions we've done. I would really love for this to be like a month where we kind of smash our record and have a lot of participation, even if it's just a couple people or a few people. It doesn't have to look like what it looked like in Toronto or what it looked like in Oslo with those really amazing things. It can be yourself or a few people doing an action. Jenny showed us a couple months ago the power that one person on selfie mode doing civil disobedience can have by getting a lot of really awesome coverage around that. So with that said, I'm just going to jump in, and this way anybody who hasn't started planning an action yet can hopefully use this guide to really jump right into it and have a cool action by the end of the month. And also too, anybody that isn't yet added into, we have a special WhatsApp chat for people who are organizing Rose's Law actions. So if you're not in there yet, please just comment in the chat that you'd like to be added, and we can get you onboarded into that chat where we share resources and planning and coordinate things in general. So Animal Bill of Rights, what animals need on their path to liberation. So I think a lot of us know that, we've seen a lot of different welfare reforms over the years. We've seen a lot of animal protection laws go into place over the years, and there's a lot that are in place already. And what we definitely see when we go to farms, when we see videos, is that none of these laws or welfare reforms are frankly having much impact, if any, certainly not providing animals the protection they need. And so I think it's time that not just us as a movement, but society as a whole throws up our hands and admits that as long as we are using animals, owning animals, exploiting animals, they're going to be suffering immensely, and none of it's acceptable. So it's time for an Animal Bill of Rights that grants them the same basic rights that any of us deserve. The Animal Bill of Rights is laid out as these 5 basic principles. And if anybody wants to try to advocate for the Animal Bill of Rights in your area, you're free to take these principles and expand on them so long as you're still sort of following the spirit. We just wouldn't want somebody advocating for an Animal Bill of Rights that had a different killing method for chickens or larger cages or something. We want to end this stuff, and here are the 5 principles that we think kind of cover a lot of the main issues. First is the right to rescue from distress and exploitation. So if someone's in a situation where they need help, we people should have the right to rescue them out of there. Those animals should have the right to be rescued. And we see that this is really relevant right now because folks who do that, even in absolutely legal situations that are pretty undeniably like within the law, the activists and the rescuers are the ones who are facing felony charges while the farms are not being investigated or prosecuted at all. Next up is the right to a protected home, habitat, or ecosystem. Right now, of course, we see a lot of stuff happening where the Amazon's on fire and so much, and even just the expansion of our own human footprint on the planet. We're constantly taking away homes from animals and destroying their homes, often for the sake of animal exploitation, animal agriculture, and such. So we want people to have the right to a home if you're someone's companion or a domesticated animal, or at least a habitat or an ecosystem that is safe. Next, have the right to have your interest represented in court and protected by law. So none of these rights really mean much if we can't sue on someone's behalf or prosecute on someone's behalf and be sure that animals are individuals who can have their day in court to have their rights protected. Next is the right to not be exploited, abused, or killed by humans. And maybe this is like the one that's closest to a lot of our hearts and our spirits of what we fight for. And it's just very basic. We don't think that any animal on the planet deserves to be exploited, killed, or abused by humans. And we add humans in there just in case anybody wants to come at us with the old lions, though. Last but not least is the right to be free or to have a guardian, to not be owned. So we think that all the animals out there ought to either be recognized as someone who's free out there in nature, or if they are somebody who needs a guardian, to have a guardian. So we wouldn't want to exactly just say, okay, all the human children on the planet are now free. These 5-year-olds can just go roam wherever they want. No, in their best interest, it's important for them to have a guardian. And so we want animals who need to have a guardian to also have one as well. So getting away from an ownership model and towards a guardianship model. And we'll have 5 steps on how to get this started today. And one will be to find your team. 2 will be to make the ask, 3 will be to plan an action, 4 will be to tell the world, and 5 will be to execute and support. And like a lot of things that we do around here, these steps don't happen exactly in order. There's going to be a lot of overlap. So while you're working on step 5, you're still going to be working on step 4. We'll jump in now to step 1, and that is finding your team. And that starts with actually just creating an event page. Like right off the bat, when you decide that you want to do this, I would encourage you, unless you want to organize in a way that's like very secretive for security culture reasons, which I don't think is particularly necessary unless you're maybe involving a farm or something. But if you're going to do a protest at a business or a political building, then I think you can get away with just having an event page that's maybe it has to be determined for the time and date at first until you figure that out. And then when you determine your location, it's not going to be, right at City Hall or wherever you might be thinking about. You might make it a few blocks away so you can brief and then walk there as a team. And on the screen, you see an example of just a Facebook cover photo you can use to throw that up there. Also in the outline is a link to an event page that you can use to copy the description. The cover photo you see now could be for Rose's Law Animal Bill of Rights. It's a typical day of action, and you're free to make your own, of course, too, or ask for some assistance with getting one. And we have another one that is that's also specifically if you think that your action might involve risking arrest and you feel that's something you want to use to generate support and interest in your action. So having that chain on there and just, sort of laying out that there might be some locking down is something you might want to advertise openly. It's what we're doing here in the Bay Area, or something that you don't want to advertise. So that's just something to think about. And after getting that event page up, you can start seeing who's interested and start looping them into your team, if you don't already have a few people who are down to organize with you. Also is promoting to drive attendance. So actions, when you make an event page, my wife could tell you, they don't just magically get like a lot of people interested in them. You really have to spend some time talking about it on social media, talking about it to people in person, certainly messaging folks online and trying to get them to engage. And so just promoting your action is going to be pretty important. Next up is going to be recruiting early roles. So we have a picture here of Christina Liu, who took action at ALC, and she's participating in civil disobedience. And so these are folks who you want to try to gauge interest on very early in the procedure, because you might say like, oh yeah, I want to do this like awesome action like Oslo did, and I'm going to plan for that. But if you don't really know ahead of time that you have some individuals who would be in a position to take that kind of risk, then you can't, you're not going to be able to do that right away. Also too, at this stage, you definitely want to start seeking legal advice. So when you're recruiting people who might be interested in risking arrest, you want to be able to give them the best advice that you can get, and also put them in touch with lawyers if they like, to help them understand what risks are there, so they can decide if they want to take risks or not. And then you can move on to the next step, which is making the ask. So, and that's going to boil down to who, what, where, when, and why. So if you want to do a dramatic action, there's a lot of times I think where we've established that, like Whole Foods, for instance, has ignored countless pleas for us to, sit down with them and talk. And so we feel justified to go into Whole Foods at any time and say, hey, we're here speaking on behalf of the animals whose bodies are in your store. And so we don't feel like there's a necessary need to always reach out and talk to them. But with Rose's Law, as much as it's an ask that is a long-term ask, and a lot of places might not be inclined to just, or able to just make it happen anytime soon, you really want to literally get the ball rolling figuratively and actually make connections with people and talk to people and see where you can get some support. We were very surprised, frankly, to see how much support we were able to get early from the city of Berkeley. And as far as that ask, the first thing, just ask maybe, who are you going to ask? So maybe you're going to ask your city council. Maybe you're going to ask your governor. Maybe you're going to ask all those people and all these other bodies too. Maybe you're going to ask Jeff Bezos. Maybe you're going to go to Whole Foods with a message for Jeff and say, hey, you're not a government body, but you're one of the most powerful companies in the world. And if you were to get behind this Bill of Rights idea, then that would carry so much weight. And so maybe that's who you want to ask. And so then you want to ask, like, well, what are we going to ask this person? So if it's you know, a city council person, maybe it is to introduce a resolution in support. If it's Jeff Bezos, maybe it's to, you're going to ask him to like come out and say, hey, Amazon is going to be this massive company that now decides to make a shift globally away from animals in their system, and that's their way of trying to save the world. They are in a unique position where they're not fighting day and night for little bits of market share. They're so huge that governments are talking about breaking them up. So they have the ability. They could risk it. And they could say, hey, you know, bottom line, somewhat be damned, we're going to do something that's going to save the planet. And that would be amazing. It's a long shot, but I think you could definitely ask it. The when, you're going to like wonder, all right, when should we make this ask? If you're going to ask city council something, it might make sense to try to have part of that ask at least take place, you know, during the week when they're in office. That doesn't mean that if you're someplace that's going to mobilize much better on the weekends, that you can't have the action take place also on the weekend, but you'd at least want to send somebody during the week to make the ask to city council. Maybe someone could consider risking arrest with just a couple people or a few people on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and then on that weekend, you have another action that's in support of those activists who are arrested to sort of underline that, yes, we really want this to be addressed. So city council, we're here in support of our friends who asked you earlier in the week. The where, I think where is a lot of flexibility. You can ask city council or city hall a question from right there, or you could be on a farm or at a slaughterhouse, like Oslo's in front of a slaughterhouse, and they were asking that slaughterhouse to allow cameras inside. But I believe that you could also go there and ask that the representatives of that area address this issue. And the why is probably the most important part. And so with anything you do, you want to ask yourself why, and probably not just once. Whatever your answer is, say like, well, why? You know, why do we want Rose's Law, Animal Bill of Rights? Well, we want it because, you know, we think it's what's needed. Well, why do we think it's what's needed? Well, because historically everything else is not working. Well, why is it not working? And you just keep kind of going down that path and try your best to do exceptional work where you're taking actions that have a lot of strategy behind them. Next is actually planning the action. And again, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about today, if you take a look at the outline, it's very linked up with links to project plans and also videos from our local YouTube page where Almira and Tanya are kind of, you know, unloading their brain to share with us all their awesome organizing skill. So you just want to start planning that action. Use that outline as a guide for resources, and also reach out with any questions you might have. The first thing I think is great to think about when planning an action is just like aesthetics, including materials. So on your screen now, you see a typical placard that we might use for an action. Instead of "It's not food, it's violence," which is a great message, I believe, it says "Animal Bill of Rights, Rose's Law." And when you're talking about materials, you want to have something that's going to be very legible for people to read. It's not super important that it's printed like this. There are other opportunities we can talk about, but I think it's important to have a nice, clear message that people can read and they don't have to think a ton about. And I think that the less number of like communications you have at your action might help either the press or people who are watching or anybody watching your videos not be too overloaded with a lot of different messaging. So if you want to stick with a couple different placards or a couple different things, that's good, but I wouldn't have like a huge mix of a lot of different things. So not like over here it says "Go vegan," over here it says "It's not food, it's violence," over here it says "Animal Bill of Rights." I think maybe try to have something kind of concise. DXC.io/RL materials is a folder that's growing every day. It's just a bunch of different design options for placards, leaflets, posters, stuff like that. And anything that you'd like, you can reach out to me and say, "Hey, Paul, can we get this language in there or that language?" Or you have an idea for something. I'm really happy to help designing that. Other things, maybe printing stuff out is kind of expensive at times. And if you would like some support, also reach out for that. We can send you an application to apply for some support for printing costs or other action costs. But also you can do some pretty great things on a budget too. So what you see on the screen now is just a bunch of like 33-cent poster board from the Dollar Tree and just some black and white paint. And we just took a piece of vinyl, like a shower curtain, and cut out "Animal Liberation Now," and then you get a paint roller, and you just, you know, for a couple hours, you just become a factory and make a bunch of these things, and they look a little grassrootsy, which is great because that's what we are. Another option too is just hand-drawn stuff that's kind of clear. So here's me with a thing that I made at ALC. It just says Rose's Law, Animal Bill of Rights. It's cute because it's got like a little rose on it, makes it a little different. But I think, you know, you don't have to always have like the most professional stuff. It's just something that's clear, easy for people to read, and a consistent message. Oh yeah, also, how could I forget? Bring pictures of animals. Frankly, like, you know, here's Oslo in front of a slaughterhouse. There's not a word on this placard, but it just shows like, hey, this is who we're advocating for. And so I don't think you can ever go wrong by having photos of animals, nice and large, especially animals who are relevant to a particular area. And, you know, maybe sometimes if they're particularly graphic, some folks might think it's disrespectful or not that effective. But, you know, I think there's arguments either way. So just be thoughtful and come up with some good photos you'd like to include. And again, reach out. We can also provide those too. So next, I'd like to talk about dress code a bit. Dress code is not something that we typically have at our actions or anything. But when you're going to do something like considering risking arrest, I think it's really good to think about, you know, what sort of message are you going to convey? What are you going to look like to the public who's seeing you? And just like we draw on past successful social justice movements throughout history for strategy, for community building and ideas, I think it's great to also look back at successful movements and draw from their aesthetics. And so we got a couple pictures here of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, both who are dressed like really sharply on days where they knew they were going to get arrested. So MLK would, you know, be planning to march on some days, and if he thought that he was going to go to jail, he'd say, okay, I'm going to definitely put my suit on today. And Rosa Parks, you know, got on that bus. It wasn't a chance encounter. You know, she decided, like, this is the day that I'm going to get on the bus. I'm not going to move. And so when I'm rested, I'm going to look nice and sharp and try to convey this message the best I can. At the same time, we want to value looking a way that we think is going to make our message really well received by people outside of our movement. At the same time, we don't want to just really try to, you know, cover up anybody's personality or anything like that. So if you decide like, hey, for this action, you know, we might be going to jail, we might be going to court, we're going to kind of dress for it. But if somebody's like, hey, that's not me, man, I'm tattoos and I want to wear what I'm going to wear, then, like, you know, I think it's up to you, obviously, but I would say let them. Like, we like people who are looking at our actions to hopefully see themselves somewhere in the action. So if you see an action and it's all people with like animal rights t-shirts and tattoos, there's a lot of people that are not going to see themselves in your action. And on the other side, if it's everybody's dressed up in a suit, there's also a lot of people who aren't going to see themselves in your action. So I think it's great to dress sharp and also be sure that your action is representative of the public. And on that topic, like, for instance, here's a photo of some activists. They're environmental activists. They're locking down, doing civil disobedience, I'm sure for a good cause. And I'm in full support, but I just know my grandma would say like, oh, those guys are shaggy and I don't like how they're dressed. So she doesn't care what their cause is. She's not going to be supportive. And conversely, we got a photo again from Oslo, where again, it's just a group of people who are sitting down, being locked down, but just a difference of not even necessarily dressing up, but having an aesthetic. Like, they're dressed in sharp, clean, you know, blue shirts, uniformed. And not just that, their whole demeanor and their whole vibe is like very serious and meaningful. So when I see these folks, like, I think like, wow, like, I really respect what they're doing, and I want to learn more about it. I want to be supportive. And then as far as taking it a step further, this is a group of 4 of our activists who are facing felonies for different mass actions. And this is them at court, dressed sharp. And so I think we'd like to think like, hey, when we're going to city council, we want to sort of present ourselves in a way that the city council people present themselves. Like, you want to kind of meet people where they're at sometimes. So I'm going to try to, you know, for our action, I think we're going to try to mimic these sort of like business attire looks. Just some examples from some stock image models. You've got, you know, some slacks, a little sweater, light colored shirts with or without a kind of a tie that's not too fancy. If you come out with this look, there's a good chance that the press and the public will think like, wow, that's different. I'm used to seeing a different kind of look from people who are chained up to City Hall, and hopefully that has a great impact. Next is your project plan, and this is it's in the outline. There's a link to Amira's 5th out of 4, her 5-part series on why you need a project plan and how to run one. I can't tell you enough. It's like each video is 5 or 6 minutes. They're really great, and the information is extremely important. If you've ever felt like, hey, there's so much going on, I don't know how we're going to plan this, this video is for you. It's a really great tool. So definitely have your project plan and then stay on top of it. Check it every day, see what action items are coming up for what people, check in with them, see what kind of support they need to be sure that they get things done on time and to a high degree. Number 4 is going to be telling the world through press, social media, and hitting the street. And with this one, I like to just harken back to the idea of like, this is what animals need. If we believe that animals need a Bill of Rights, we really have to work hard to do it. And sometimes those of us who are good at or up for planning and action, like that's a great skill. Maybe we're just not always one to toot our own horns about it, or we don't know how to reach out to press, or we're not like, just on the street advertising it. But in order to have it happen, like, and get a good impact, you want to do that before, during, and after. So also linked is Matt's press handbook at dxe.io/press handbook. Matt Johnson, our press coordinator, did a really good job making a handbook to help you learn how to get press for any actions. Be active on social media, like multiple platforms. If you're live streaming on Facebook, ask yourself, well, is there someone who could also go live on Instagram?
If I could jump in really fast with that press handbook too, we're trying to continually improve that document, this living document. So that link, you should be able to just comment on it. If there's anything that's not clear, any questions or comments, just highlight something and press a little plus button and you can put a comment there. And if that doesn't make sense, you can always just message me. So let us know what your questions are, because if you have a question, somebody else is probably thinking the same thing.
Thanks, Matt. And lastly is execute and support. And this is an interesting one. Like some parts of it are pretty cut and dry, and it's like have a checklist. That's linked in the outline, a checklist of all these different things you might need day of. If you don't really look at a checklist, you'll probably forget something. Like we've all done it, and it's a shame because we know we should use checklists, but the minute that you don't, inevitably you probably end up with something you don't have. Maybe it's the red roses, or maybe it's the blue t-shirts, or maybe it's bottled water for the activists who are on any of the teams, but definitely use your checklist. Also linked is a how to marshal a protest video by Tanya. So check that out. Marshaling is going to be something that starts essentially, you're organizing from day one. Marshaling is sort of like in the moment. And while doing that, like it mentions here, you may need to adapt. You may need to ask yourself questions, check in with your team. These kind of actions, like more than other actions, they might just transform on the fly a bit and things will be out of your control. So it's just going to be important to have a good, just a good feeling, a good vibe, feel confident in yourself and your team, and then take things in stride. And when something hits you kind of out of left field, just take it easy, just roll with it and make a good decision yourself or as a team. And then lastly is important to just empathize all along the way with everybody involved. Like when you're executing this action, think about people who might be chained up. Do they need some shade? Do they need some sunblock? Do they need some water? Do they maybe not want their photo taken at unflattering angles? Are the people in the green team feeling like, hey, we can't see the action? Maybe we should get them closer to where they can see things. Are the people who are honking their horns because maybe you're blocking traffic, like what are they on their way to? They're trying to get to work, and now this is happening. We feel justified and taking time out of people's day for this, but at the same time we want to keep in mind like what they're going through, how they feel, and of course with animals who are suffering, and that's why we're doing this. And empathize with the people who are trying to change. Sometimes if we can put ourselves in their shoes, we'll have a much better understanding of like what we can do to help them change. So just to reiterate, you want to find your team, you're going to make an ask, plan an action, tell everybody about it, and then execute and support. And that's how you hopefully get started on doing an awesome Animal Bill of Rights Rose's Law action at the end of the month or the beginning of next month between September 29th and October 6th. If you want to go earlier or later, that's great too. That's happening a bit already. But that's the week. September 29th is the anniversary that Rose, the hen who was rescued from McCoy Farms, the Amazon supplier, got her life spared. And so we want to kick this off with her. We want to reach out to other groups and see if they'll support Animal Bill of Rights. And hopefully this is a campaign that sticks around for years. Like we're talking about an action today, but if it goes well, hopefully it's the start of like a real ask that we can all sort of get behind. Animal liberation now is not something everybody understands. Every animal happy, safe, and free. Or that could be a lot of things and maybe not immediately achievable. But these 5 principles in this Bill of Rights hopefully are something that we can